Daesh, who call themselves ISIS, are known as the world's most feared terrorist organization. But how did they come into existence? And how did they get so powerful? To help us understand, we need to go back to the US invasion of Iraq.
American and coalition forces are in the early stages of military operations to disarm Iraq, to free its people, and to defend the world from grave danger.
But did the coalition invasion of Iraq actually make the world a safer place? Let's take a look. In March 2003, the Americans topple Saddam Hussein, removing the Ba'ath Party from power. That leaves Ba'athist soldiers and political operatives out of work and out of power. Saddam's government was led mostly by Sunnis, who are the minority in the Shia-dominated country. The US forms a transition government in Iraq, installing mostly Shia leaders. This leaves Sunnis feeling marginalized. With Saddam's government dissolved, violent terrorist groups began to move into the vacuum. Abu Mus'ab al-Zarqawi, a Jordanian militant, travels from Afghanistan to Iraq via Iran to join the intensifying insurgency. Osama bin Laden, the leader of Al-Qaeda, sees the chaos in Iraq as an opportunity to expand and appoints Zarqawi as his group's representative in Iraq. And so, Al-Qaeda in Iraq, otherwise known as AQI, is born and goes on to become the leading Sunni insurgent group in the country. AQI launch a campaign of suicide bombings in order to foment sectarian hatred. They target the US and Iraqi armies and step up attacks, further inflaming sectarian violence in the country and exacerbating a civil war that leaves hundreds of thousands dead. Zarqawi wants to prevent the formation of a Shia-dominated government and establish Al-Qaeda's presence in Iraq. But Al-Qaeda's own leadership disapproves of Zarqawi's brutality, fearing public backlash and a loss of support. Zarqawi ignores them. Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, the Iraqi extremist who will eventually become the leader of Daesh, is held by the coalition at the Camp Bucca detention facility. In fact, it is inside US-operated prisons that he networks with former Ba'athists and other opponents of the occupation, many of whom will go on to become senior Daesh members. Now, back to AQI. It suffers a major blow in 2006 when Zarqawi is killed by a US airstrike. But this doesn't stop them. Instead, they join forces with other Iraqi militants who are aligned to their interests, including former Ba'ath Party hardliners. This kicks off their process of rebranding as ISI, the Islamic State in Iraq. Throughout this period, the Assad regime in Syria allows AQI to transfer terrorists and weaponry through their territory into Iraq to fight against coalition forces. This continues until 2009. Meanwhile, the US allies with local Sunni leaders who see a partnership with the US as a way to gain political, economic and social capital. This alliance leads to a military strategy called The Awakening. The Awakening is a joint operation between local Sunni groups and the coalition. It leads to major defeats for AQI, a decrease in violence across the country, and eventually forces AQI to go underground.
After nearly 9 years, America's war in Iraq will be over.
As US forces begin their withdrawal, Iraqi Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki starts to exert more control over the Iraqi armed forces. He begins empowering sectarian Shia militias aligned to Iran. Sectarian violence continues to plague the country, and by 2013 the death toll returns to pre-awakening levels. Al-Qaeda, who had previously lost strategic power in the country following the awakening, begins regrouping. The group's new leader, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, appointed in 2010, increases membership and support for the group. This is due, in part, to a backlash triggered by Maliki's increasingly sectarian administration. By this point, the Arab Spring is making waves throughout the region, and neighboring Syria is facing a civilian uprising against ruling leader Bashar al-Assad. Syria is becoming more chaotic and destabilized, creating the perfect opportunity for Al-Qaeda to expand and dispatch operatives into Syria. This swells their numbers and further empowers them. Bashar al-Assad uses increasingly brutal methods to suppress the democratic uprising, focusing his forces on imprisoning and murdering civilian activists. Assad, whose regime had a pre-existing relationship with AQI, releases violent extremists from detention facilities in order to paint the uprising in a sectarian light. Some of these prisoners will later go on to join Daesh. In 2013, AQI announces it is taking control of all Al-Qaeda branches and affiliates in Iraq and Syria. It rebrands itself the Islamic State in Iraq and the Levant, aka ISIS. But on the Arab streets, they're called Daesh. Al-Qaeda Central Command rejects this power grab, deepening the rift between the two groups. Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi's Daesh breaks off ties with Al-Qaeda and begins seizing control of swathes of territory. In Syria, bolstered by thousands of new foreign volunteers, they start attacking Syrian rebel groups and taking control of previously liberated areas. The group moves their capital to the Syrian city of Al-Raqqa. In Iraq, the group makes sweeping gains. They take control of Iraq's second largest city, Mosul, in its entirety, as the Iraqi army's control in the region disintegrates. Baghdadi makes his first public appearance, leading prayers in a mosque in Mosul and announcing himself as Caliph of the self-proclaimed Daesh Caliphate. Reviled by the group's brutal campaign of murder, rape and oppression, Baghdadi's claimed caliphate is rejected by the vast majority of Muslims worldwide, with Muslim countries signing up to join the global anti-Daesh coalition. Vowing to defeat Daesh, the US-led coalition declares war on the group and begins airstrikes on Iraq and Syria. Nearly 3 years on, as international forces close in on Mosul, Daesh's aspirations of statehood appear to be waning. Multiple military operations have weakened the group, and they've lost significant territory in Iraq, Syria and Libya. In response, it has increased its wave of violent terrorist attacks in Europe and across the world.